When you think of luxury Japanese watches, you think Grand Seiko. You know a little bit more, you think about Credor. And when you think about Credor, you think three-handed dress watches that are mad expensive. So how can you get a Credor chronograph for under $3,000? Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso, and yes, today we are talking about a Credor, specifically a Credor chronograph that you're going to get for less than $3,000. I'm talking about the Credor Phoenix. That's right, it's a Credor, Seiko's highest of high brands. It's an in-house chronograph, and yet it's still under $3,000. How is this even possible? Well, to start out, like in anything, we need to talk a little bit about the history first. And let's start with the history of Credor. So back in 1974, quartz watches were all the rage. The quartz crisis was in full swing. They were the most advanced technology you could get. And so unlike today, some of them were quite expensive. So Seiko created a spin-off of its Seiko brand called Credor in order to market its high-end luxury quartz watches. However, it wasn't until 1978 that Credor actually became its own brand with the dials reading Credor Seiko, and it wasn't until 1980 that the actual logo started appearing. And all of this was happening just in Japan. Credor to this day is still very difficult to find outside of Japan, and that's because it's the Seiko group's highest of high luxury. Credors are often mentioned in the same conversations as things like Patek Philippe, A. Lange & Söhne, as the highest of high luxury watches. But that hasn't always been the case in terms of how they've actually been marketed and sold. They've always been marketed and sold as better and more luxurious than Seiko. However, the differences between Credor and Grand Seiko weren't always so stark in terms of positioning. Instead, they were different philosophically. It wasn't until somewhat recently that positioning-wise, Credor has been pushed much higher. It's been much more about the actual philosophies behind the brand. Grand Seiko has always been about pushing the boundaries and the limits of accuracy, precision, and also in terms of creating a very functional watch. And part of that has included making a design that is very, very precise. It's no coincidence that most Grand Seikos look very similar. It's because they all follow what's known as the grammar of design. It's an actual fixed design philosophy that's applied to all Grand Seiko watches, and you can see it when you look at their range. On the other hand, Credor has always philosophically operated in a different way. They've always been more focused on dress watches, specifically thin ones, usually in precious metal, focusing on artisan crafts, including gem setting. If anything, they're more viewed as works of art, whereas Grand Seiko has always been presented as a work of high technology. And it's because of this that the Credor range is much more varied in terms of its actual design language, because it's got a lot more freedom. The focus is to make something that is just beautiful, but crucially still very elegant. And that brings us to the Credor Phoenix. In 1998, the Phoenix was released, and this was important for so many reasons, chief amongst which this was the first automatic mechanical chronograph caliber that Seiko had made since the 1960s, when they made one of the first automatic chronograph calibers ever. Now, the discussion of that, the El Primero or the Calibre 11, who came first, we'll leave that for another video. But crucially, this was their first foray going back into it, and that was with the 6S family of chronographs. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's because the Tag Heuer Calibre 1887, yes, the controversial Tag Heuer Seiko movement, was based on the designs and the architecture of the 6S caliber. So that historical importance shows why this was called the Phoenix. It was literally like the rebirth. It was something that had, for the most part, died in the Seiko brand, but it was then being reborn and ushering in a new era, an era that still continues today with both Seiko and Grand Seiko making chronograph watches. But it started with this Credor. And this Credor ran from 1998 to 2003 and was sold only in Japan. So these are extremely rare watches, and you look at it right away, and this is very much 90s design, however with the same sort of precision that you would expect from a Japanese company, and more importantly, still following that ethos of something that is beautiful, emphasizing on craftsmanship, emphasizing on elegance that one associates with Credor. I mean, for starters, this is an automatic chronograph that's only 14 millimeters thick. Considering most modern automatic chronographs are 15, 16 millimeters even, this is still quite reasonable, and it still had 100 meters of water resistance. And then there's little details like the little gem set in the crown, very similar to what Cartier does. There's an elegant symmetry across the dial because it has the logo and the date placed at that 3 o'clock instead of another sub-dial. It still sort of creates a nice balance. Everything is really, really crisp and streamlined. This isn't the big chunkiness that we expect from Grand Seiko chronographs, for example, which in some cases reach up to 17 millimeters thick. So this is a view of a different approach for a Japanese chronograph, but it doesn't really sacrifice much in terms of quality, and the movement on the inside was so advanced even till today's standards. It's a column wheel chronograph. It has 50 hours of power reserve, while things like the 7750 that were used at the time in Swiss watches is only at 42 hours of power reserve and using a cam system as opposed to a column wheel. All of these little details emulate what Credor stands for. It is a beautiful looking watch in a segment that wasn't really characterized for it, because this is still a sports chronograph. It's still 100 meters water resistant. It's still something that would have been cross-shopped with Speedmasters of the time, for example. And that's a proper tool watch. But this manages to be elegant in its own way. And the crazy thing is that all of this still has the Credor philosophy, but for much less. These days, most Credors are made in precious metals and they're priced in 5 figures. However, this only costs 3,000 US or less if you can find an example. And that's the challenge, is finding an example that's actually in good condition, that has all its paperwork, and that is actually available, because this was a Japan-only model. Right now, as I make this video, I can't even find any online on Chrono24. When I originally discovered this watch, there were, I think, 3 listings. So it's definitely something that there aren't many of. It's very rare. But what I like about it is that it's not showy. It's elegant. When I first discovered this, I was actually looking for Seiko chronographs, thinking of, I'd like a chronograph, but I'd like something that I can wear every day, maybe something that won't cost me too much and that can sort of replace my Steinhardt in the role of my beater watch. And then I discovered this, and it's just so much more. On the one hand, if you don't want to draw attention, it's very under the radar. Someone will look at it and probably just see Seiko and think nothing of it. But on the other hand, if you find someone who actually recognizes this watch, that's probably someone you want to have a conversation with. This is very much a watch for those who know and not a watch for those who show. So I think it was just a cool watch to discover, and I wanted to share that with you guys. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this Credor Phoenix? Would you get something like this instead of a modern Seiko chronograph? Would you get something like this instead of something like, let's say, a Speedy or a Tag Heuer Carrera? Both of those are more expensive, but also when you start looking into pre-owned, you can probably start cross-shopping these. Do you think that this has the same appeal? Do you think it still carries on the philosophy of Grand Seiko or Credor? Or does this feel like it's just a Seiko? I'd love to know your thoughts and comments below, as well as know what you guys think of Credor in general. It's a very mysterious brand, so if you guys have any other knowledge about it, I'd love to know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, make sure you like it and share it. If you want to see more pictures of watches and the infographics that I use, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shaluso. And of course, if you want to see more videos of watches, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell as well so you know when my next video comes out. In any case, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.